Okay, before we get into the rest of the refinishing, I've got all the legs stripped, I've got all the pieces stripped. The one thing that we have left to do before we get into the sanding portion is to fix that joint that we were talking about earlier. So, as you can see, I've stripped it, but you can see right there you've got that crack in that joint, and that's going to keep not only wobbling, but that's going to be a real pain in the keister when we try to put this thing back together. So what we're going to do is we're going to epoxy the joint. We're going to separate the joint out. So we just kind of wiggle that until it separates into the two pieces. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill the edge in here where the break is. We're going to put some epoxy in there, and then we're going to epoxy the whole joint and clamp it. So to make that happen, you're going to need a few things. One is you're going to need epoxy. I am a huge fan of this System 3 epoxy. It's a two-part that you mix yourself. This is the smaller set. These are 4 ounces a piece, and it goes for about 20, maybe a little more than 20 bucks. I get mine at Woodcraft. I swear by this stuff. It's absolutely incredible. It just, in a blink, it's together. They call this the 5-minute cure, and it really is. So you got to make sure that you're doing work pretty quickly. So I'm going to work a little more quickly than normal, and I'm also going to maybe talk a little bit more quickly as I'm working. So you're going to need your epoxy. Second thing you're going to need is you're going to need some sort of like small throwaway brush. They sell these at a bunch of different stores, model stores, stuff like that, but you can tell this thing is really cheap. You can kind of see in the end there's nothing really there. It's bendy, it's a cheap piece of crap brush. They sell them by the bagful because the whole point is that you throw these things away once you're done with them, and you are never going to be able to use this again. Third thing you use is something to mix on, something that you're not going to care too much about. I always grab kind of the back of a Diet Coke box, rip it up. I try to create a little indentation though, so that it'll pool in there as I'm kind of mixing. So I'm going to do this in front of the camera, and then I'm going to mix quick and get into this real fast so that it doesn't set, because it will set while we're talking. So first thing you do, you grab the part A, that's the resin, and you just kind of give yourself, people say to measure and stuff like that. In most cases I do measure, not with epoxy, for two good reasons. One is, by the time I get into this thing, if I'm measuring, I'm already losing the battle. And the second is, you can kind of eyeball it. So I try to create just like about a little dollop there. You can see kind of in there what I'm looking like, just a little bit there, because that's going to double in size once I add the resin, the hardener. The hardener is part B. So you flip that open, keep it, don't dip it in there, but keep it close. And what you really want to do is just kind of get it to sit down, and then just kind of cover over that blob that you did. So that way you're pretty much mixing equal parts. It's going to be close. That's all that's really going to matter. Once you get that done, you start whipping through this thing real quick. You'll notice that it's starting to set up already, which is what some of that white stuff is. But you can see it starting to set pretty quick. So what I'm doing right now, in case you can't see, I'm kind of moving this around so you can see a little bit better. But I'm taking the epoxy and I'm kind of just jamming it with the brush into that crack, because I want that crack to heal. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brush this into the space in between the two pieces. So I'm brushing this in there, and I'm probably going to touch a little bit on the metal and so forth. Now, the question you might be asking yourself is, well, isn't that going to be kind of messy? Well, that's why we do it after we do the stripping, but before we do the sanding, because the goal is, if we sand well, we can sand this off. Got myself a nice clamp. Always have your clamps nearby. I like pressure clamps, although for some reason I go through these things pretty quickly. What I've got going on right now is I've got this thing clamped, and you can kind of see in there a little bit. I'm kind of holding it so you can see it. I'm not worried about the wiggle in between the two pieces. That's not bothering me too much. But I want to make sure that the metal part in here is all nicely tightened, so you can see how that crack is healed. Now it's getting a little drippy. You can use your finger if you want and wipe it on something that you don't care about. But again, this stuff heals really quick. So I'm going to put this down and let it just sit while we're talking about this. Because as of right now, you can already start to see it's starting to thicken up. Now, did I waste some? Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is the one thing that you want to understand about epoxy. Once you start it, you're pretty much stuck with it. So the last thing you want to do is get caught short. I would rather waste a little epoxy than I would spend like too much time dinking around. It's also the idea of making sure that your clamp is nearby, making sure that the stuff is nearby, making sure that you're getting the pieces together as fast as you can. You cannot dink around with this stuff. Now, the question, of course, then comes up is, well, why don't you go with a longer curing epoxy? Good question. The reason why I don't is because longer curing epoxies often will have problems with them in terms of setup. The mixing has to be a little bit more precise, I've found. And the other thing that's a problem with it is that in a lot of cases, stuff will shift. I don't want stuff moving. I don't want something getting bumped on the table, the thing shifts, and then it's kind of goopy and gooky and kind of half-healed. I want this stuff to heal up pretty solid. So I'm gonna kind of let you see this. I mean, it's already kind of locking the brush in there. Once we come back for the next video, I'll show you what this looks like once the thing's together, and I'll tell you about how much time it took for it to get that way. But that's gonna cure. Once that's done curing and it sets up and everything's kind of solid, I'll start with the next version of the next video, which will be the sanding of the major pieces. So let me know if you need anything else. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and tell me if this is actually helping you.